Hi, welcome back, and we're going to start our look of the subregions of Bordeaux with the most prestigious one, the most recognized, the most sought after subregion of Bordeaux, and that is Médoc. So Médoc is in the north of the Bordeaux region and on the left bank of the Garonne River, and more precisely on the left bank of the Gironde estuary, because that's it's after the Garonne and where the Dordogne come together to form the Gironde. The Médoc is home to the most prestigious appellations of the Bordeaux region. We have, going from north to south, Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint-Julien. Then we go to Listrac en Médoc, Moulis, and Margaux. Those are all named after towns in this region. We then have two regional appellations to the north and south and throughout, because you're allowed to, if you wish, downgrade to a regional appellation. We have the appellations of Haut-Médoc and Médoc. So I hope you remember, in Médoc, the dominating classification is the 1855 classification of Grand Crus, of first growth. So Pauillac is the appellation with most Premier Grand Cru, first growths. And then we have Margaux. And then, I don't know if you remember, we have one in the Grave region. But this is the place with the most sought after wines in Bordeaux, definitely, probably in France and in the world. The soils here, I don't know if you remember, but the soils here are of a gravel dominant, a grave dominant. We also have other elements in the soils of the Médoc. We're going to have some sand, we're going to have some clay, and a little bit of limestone. The soils aren't very consistent throughout an appellation. In fact, what we have in the Médoc is a vast mosaic of different soils and subsoils, which make up a very big diversity in the styles of soil and subsoil and what it's going to bring to the plant. The big influence here in the Médoc is the multiplicity of hills and the different exposition of hills. Now, I told you that what's important for terroir is soil, definitely, but then we're going to have the exposition of the different hills, and the exposition grape vines are going to have to the sun. It's going to give us different maturities. A hill that's facing southwards is going to have a different exposition to a hill facing southeast or eastern. In the east, you're going to have the morning sun, which is a much fresher temperature sun, whereas, for example, in the south, we're going to have all the day sun, and in the west, we're going to have the evening sun. Very different impact on the maturity of the actual fruit, and as a result, we're going to have a different influence, different typicities in the styles of wine that we're going to get. The other thing that's going to be influenced with hills, and why hills are so important, is the inclination. Now, the percentage inclination is going to have an influence on the exposition that we're going to have, but it's also going to have a very important factor in the retention of water. So all this comes together to create a vast mosaic in the Médoc, but also within each of the appellations. If we take an appellation like Pauillac, for example, we're going to have some very different terroirs with different soil, subsoil, inclination, exposition. Those are all going to be different, and different even within Pauillac, but different even within a parcel which is owned by a single chateau. So it is very difficult to say that Pauillac has the best terroir or Margaux has the best terroir. They're very, very different terroirs that are going to produce very different wines. This is why I always say to people not to think of Bordeaux and the Médoc in particular as an area with some great wines. They're going to be very different. I often hear stories of friends of mine saying, oh, I found this wonderful Bordeaux wine, which it's a chateau that sits right next to Chateau so-and-so, and they think that they've made, they've got a great find, they've made a great deal. But unfortunately, it doesn't really work like that because of this diversity in terroir, in the different parcels that you're going to have. Each vineyard is going to be very particular in the types of wines that it's going to produce, and it's going to be very particular when it's blended with the other parcels that a chateau has. So please don't think of an appellation or an area within even an appellation as being all the same. That's not the way it is in Médoc. So when we talk about terroir, one of the biggest influence on terroir has got to be when I talk about terroir in the greater name of terroir, the heritage. So it's going to be the weather, it's going to be the soil, the subsoil, the inclination, but most important here is going to be grape variety, the choice of grape variety. Now, I told you about the Bordeaux blend, Cabernet, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Malbec, named Côte here, Carmenère for the reds. In Médoc, the big dominant is Cabernet Sauvignon, okay? So you've got to think Cabernet Sauvignon dominated wines in the Médoc, and then we're going to have Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, which are going to come and complete that blend. So what's going to influence the blend year after year? Number one, the vineyards a chateau has. So imagine a chateau has 50% of their vineyards in Cabernet Sauvignon. They might then have 20% of Merlot, 20% of Cabernet Franc, and 5% of Petit Verdot. It doesn't mean that they take all their vineyards and put them together into one wine. What they're going to do is look at that year's vintage, at the maturity each grape variety is going to have, because these grape varieties will not mature in the same way. They're not going to mature at the same time, and as a result, year after year, you can't just pick whatever's there. It doesn't really work like that. You're going to have someone who's in charge of the blend of the chateau, who's going to look at the different grape varieties, at the different vineyards, and then put each one of these wines from these grape varieties together to produce a master wine, if you wish. And it really is a very important job. The blender, the master blender within the Bordeaux region, it's a very important job, because they're going to try and produce from what's being given to them by the land the best possible wine, and it will always be dominated by Cabernet Sauvignon. So that's what you've got to think. Now, what influence is that choice going to have on the final wine? The wines that we have in the Médoc, that big Cabernet dominant, is going to give us wines that are typically very solid. By solid, I mean they've got a good fruit concentration, good roundness, so we're going to have a good level of alcohol, but more importantly than that, we're going to have a high level of tannin. Big tannin presence. And then the other thing that we're going to have, and that we try to have year in, year out, is a good acidity. Now, there were vintages in the past where it was too hot. As a result, the grapes were too mature, too sweet, without enough acidity, and those don't make for great vintages. For a great vintage in the Médoc, you need to have acidity. You're going to need to have that freshness. Why? Because this is going to give the wine aging potential. And what makes the wines of Médoc great is their fantastic aging potential. Dozens of years for the very best examples. And what is going to give them that aging potential is definitely the tannin and the acidity. So that's something that's going to be brought forward in the wines to give those wines aging potential. Now, as a downside to that is a fact that these wines in their youth are not going to be very approachable. The great wines of the Médoc are not wines to be drunk in their youth. People do drink them in their youth, but that's not what it was intended for. These wines are intended for aging. The aromas, the flavors that you're going to get are going to develop towards more tertiary aromas. I don't know if you're familiar with tertiary aromas, but it's going to be notes of of leather. It's going to be notes of more fruit that's slightly candied. It's going to be notes of certain spices, keeping at the same time, you know, those primary fruit of the blackcurrant, of plum, but together it brings for a much more complex nose. With age, the acidity and the tannin levels come down. We have a more homogeneous wine on the palate. It's not what we call angular, so you have acidity on one side, tannin on the other side, and it's all banging you in the mouth. No, we've got homogeneous. It's a harmony. It's not the trumpet playing on one side, the drums on the other. It's harmonious, and that's what the aim is with Médoc wines. The aim is to have wines that are made for aging and that are enjoyed with a bit of age. It's important that you remember that. And that is it for our look at Bordeaux's most important subregion. We're going to move down the Garonne River for our next video, where we're going to go to the Grave and the Sauternay.